So remember, there are 300 million alveoli sacs that are basically simple squamous epithelium, very thin, lined with capillaries, which are also made of simple squamous epithelium. So there's 2 cells thick between the capillary and the alveoli. So most gas exchange takes place at capillaries and alveoli. So it goes against a concentration gradient from higher to lower concentrations of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide, remember, is carried as carbonic acid, mainly in the plasma, but oxygen binds to the iron in the hemoglobin, and when it does this, it's called oxyhemoglobin and diffuses across the capillary alveoli membranes. Here's the answers to your practice quiz, which would have been a quiz under normal circumstances. The lines represent the conchae, and then there's 3 circles. I've broken the pharynx into 3 areas: the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngo or hypopharynx, which isn't labeled here. 4 is your larynx. Actually, the top part of 4 is your cricoid cricothyroid cartilage of the larynx. 5 is the trachea, and you can feel your trachea is ridged. That keeps it open for air so it doesn't collapse like your esophagus does. Your esophagus collapses, and when you bring air back up through the esophagus, it makes a burping sound, hence the burp. So 6 would be your left bronchus because it's the patient's left side. What's weird about this diagram is the left bronchus actually looks like it goes down lower than the right bronchus, but in reality, the right bronchus dips straighter down than the left because the heart's more displaced to the left side. So if you aspirate something into your lungs, it's going to 9 out of 10 times it's going to go down the right side, the right bronchus, because gravity pulls it that way. Got the pleural membrane is the lining around the lungs to let them flow smoothly so they're not rubbing. The bronchioles are smaller branches of the bronchi. And then your primary, secondary, and tertiary bronchioles, which branch out like a tree does, the smaller and smaller items. Then you get your alveoli, where the gas exchange takes place. And the diaphragm, of course, you know about that. That's the muscle which helps you breathe. So the lungs, they have this conical shape. The base is the flat part that rests against the diaphragm, and the apex is the pointy part up by the clavicles. So the right lung has 3 lobes, and the left lung has 2 lobes, and they've got what's called the cardiac notch, where the heart is displaced that side of the mediastinum. So you get your superior lobes, your medial lobe on the right side, and your inferior lobes on both sides, the lowest lobe. The hilum is the point of entry into anything. So the hilum of the lungs is the point of entry for the bronchus enters the lungs. You also have the hilus of the kidneys, where the renal arteries go into the kidneys. Apex of lung, base of lung. This diagram is here more for your study purposes. I took it straight out of the book. It goes in a nice little short synoptic detail. It's great to study from. I could read it to you, but you can read. So again, the hilum is the root of entry. So the point where the bronchus enters the lungs. So normal bronchioles will inflate, open up when air comes in, because the bronchioles now don't have a lot of cartilage lining like the bronchus. The trachea and bronchus have cartilaginous rings to keep them open. The bronchioles, however, can collapse. If you're asthmatic, those don't want to open up as much for one reason or another. It could be the smooth muscles around the outside being innervated by the nerves caused by something with your nervous system. Could be something triggering it, an odor. Some molecules in the air can trigger it. Could be exercise-induced asthma, something that causes those to not open up. So asthmatic bronchioles don't open up as much. So asthmatics, if you have asthma, you have a hard time getting air past the bronchioles down to the alveoli. It just doesn't open up as much. So they have inhalers of albuterol sulfate and other things like that, which you can puff, and that helps release that smooth muscle to open up the bronchioles. I love this diagram because it shows how the capillary network enshrouds the alveoli. and how thin the alveoli are. It's a really good diagram. You can see there's terminal bronchioli. Does it say respiratory? Yeah, respiratory bronchioli. It's called a respiratory bronchioli because here the bronchioli gets very, very thin and there is some gas exchange takes place. Now, most of it takes place in the alveoli, but a little bit in the respiratory bronchioli. So the pleural cavity, again, is lined with your pleural membranes. You have pleural fluid, like a thin spring of WD-40 between the two membranes, but really the membranes are so close to each other you can't tell them apart. It's like two little pieces of plastic wrapping stuck together so tight, but they have that fluid between them, that WD-40, very viscous fluid, or it, low viscosity actually, lets it slide really well so your lungs can move when you breathe. So again, the visceral layer touches the lungs, visceral, your viscera, your organs, and the parietal out of the perimeter touches your thoracic cavity, is stuck to the thoracic cavity basically when you're a baby and they bring you out of the womb. They cut that umbilical. First thing to do is make you take a deep breath in, whether it's to thunk your foot to make you cry, because the first thing to do to cry is take that big deep breath in. And that big deep breath in is going to open those lungs up and they stick to your thoracic cavity. That parietal layer sticks there. A pneumothorax or a collapsed lung is when that breaks away from there. Speaking of pneumothorax, pneumo meaning air, thorax, your thoracic cavity, is basically a collapsed lung. You get some air between that parietal pleura and the thoracic cavity itself. So lungs collapsing away from the cavity. So that's a huge one there in this diagram. I had a student one year who told me she's a runner and everything else. She hadn't had any trauma, but she said it really hurt when she breathed. I told her it could have been anything from a pulled muscle, a broken rib, a rib out of place. See your chiropractor, see your doctor. But I'm not a doctor, don't ask me. She came back and said, yeah, it's pneumothorax. Like, dude, I didn't even think of that. Yes, I just said, dude, dude. So the doctor simply stuck a needle in. Here they put a tube in, but just stuck a needle in her ribs, gave her a little local, stuck the needle in, and sucked that air out. And the lungs stuck. When you pull the needle out, the tissue closes around it, and that was a quick fix. So apnea, A without nia, breath. Sometimes at night, people, especially when they get older or overweight, causes too much pressure down there or extra tissue, and the your when you're sleeping, you will close up. So the airway gets closed up. Snoring is because it's again air passing through that closure, making that snoring sound. So if it closes and it's a hard time, if it's blocked, you basically wake up just enough to get that breath, to take that big deep breath in, then you fall back asleep again. So you're not getting that good deep REM sleep, and it's not beneficial sleep. A lot of people sleep apnea don't know it because they only wake up enough to take that big deep breath in and roll over, but not enough to remember them waking up. Okay, lymphatic supply. Your lymph tissue again drains all the fluid that's bathed the cells and puts it back in the blood. It also takes everything other than just old blood fluid. It takes everything back to the blood, and the blood can then be cleansed out by the kidneys. So your lymph has a lot of phagocytes, a lot of white blood cells, your neutrophils and your macrophages, which carry debris. They eat it up, take it to the lymph, where the lymph can then flush it off to the kidneys to be disposed of through urine. Debris that remains in the lung that can't be taken out by these things because you get too much of it causes them to turn gray or black. Here we have a smoker's lung from the end on, honest to goodness, true smoker's lung. Saturday Scholar saw some people who lived in the city compared to people who didn't. They have little black specks through the lung from breathing all the pollution of the city, but not as bad as like this is here with a smoker's lung. Cancer can spread through lymph vessels. That's one of the primary ways it travels because the lymph picks it up. And then, of course, it gets spread through the blood, metastasizes, and can lodge somewhere else. A healthy lung cross section and a city dweller's lung cross section. Notice the city dweller lung has speckles of spots. That's from like 70, 80, 90 years of living in the city. True smoker's lungs. Notice something here about the lungs. Not just the lungs, but the heart is also enlarged. So remember we talked about in the cardiac unit, an athlete works hard for an hour, half hour, hour or two a day, and that heart works really hard while it's while it's pumping all that extra blood needed for the exercise. But the other 22 hours of the day, that heart's on easy mode, just like a weightlifter. They lift and hit it hard, but the rest of their muscles are like on easy peasy mode for the rest of the day. Smokers' lungs, however, because smoking does so much damage, as we saw by pulling that big crusty thing out of that person's aorta at the AIM Society, is that it damages the veins and arteries and it makes it really hard for blood to be pumped. So the heart is working 24 hours a day, nonstop, hard to pump that blood through so the heart gets enlarged. That's not healthy. That's like you trying to lift weights all the time, and that's just not good for your body. So aside from plugging up the lungs, it's also bad for the heart. So cigarettes, cigars, joints, anything like that causes tracheal damage. Say, well, smoke, man, doesn't hurt me. I smoke this. You know what? It hurts your trachea. It kills the pseudociliated epithelium, kills that pseudostratified ciliated epithelium. So the cilia now cannot move the mucus down. So now the mucus builds up after years of smoking. It kills that and it gets replaced with squamous epithelium, some just regular epithelium because it gets scarred over. So the mucus and debris accumulate, and the smoker gets that smoker's cough. They want to get rid of that stuff. Give me another cigarette. And the respiratory infections are likely because the mucus is not being moved constantly down there, so the stuff has more time to penetrate the mucus and get down to the veins. So smokers are actually more at risk for any type of virus, cold virus, influenza, COVID. Irritation and inflammation also stimulate, like I say, the smoker's reflex, the cough reflex. Again, pictures of the smoker's lungs and normal lungs. Can't emphasize this enough. I have a student who's now an amazing doctor. She posted something yesterday on Facebook about what her calling was. Her calling's to help people. She's an amazing, amazing doctor right now. But when she went through the Saturday Scholars Program, she saw a real smoker's lung and told me she's quitting smoking. It's like, I showed you my simulated lungs, which you guys don't get to see in class. And she says, yeah, but you're a teacher. You're supposed to do that. When she saw the real thing, she quit. So trust me, I'm not making this up. It's real. Okay, a fun lab we get to do, but we don't get to do if we're not in class, is measuring the volumes. Tidal volume is the amount of air you breathe right now, just sitting there not doing a thing, just your diaphragm in, out. Tidal volume, like tides come in and out, in and out. So inspiratory reserve volume is you take a normal breath in, and then you take a huge breath in. All that air you can breathe in above and beyond your normal tidal volume is your inspiratory reserve. That's why it's called reserve. You can inspire, breathe in, that's your reserve volume. Likewise, you take a normal breath out, let that diaphragm relax, then blow the rest of those candles out. All that air you can blow out above and beyond your normal your tidal volume breath out is called your expiratory reserve, which you can expire out. It's reserved for breathing out. Those are three huge volumes that equal your vital capacity. That is how much air you can breathe totally out after one huge inhale, or how much you can breathe in after one huge exhale. That's called vital capacity. So practice and know these. They're important to know. You got a residual volume in your lungs which keeps them inflated no matter how much you blow out. You've always got that residual volume. So the residual volume plus your vital capacity equals your total lung capacity. Look at this, pause this, study this, know these capacities, understand them because they're important and they're good to know. With that, I've got a little practice here. Look at this and you tell me what you think the answer is. Part 3 will have the answer.